Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I normally give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. Today, though, it's all about the AuthorTube Writing Conference and specifically imposter syndrome. Let me start by defining imposter syndrome. So, what is it? It's the feeling that we aren't good enough, that our work, our writing, doesn't meet an arbitrary standard that we set for ourselves, that we aren't writing at the caliber of our favorite authors like Brandon Sanderson, N.K. Jemisin, or whichever author we've mentally elevated. In extreme cases, we convince ourselves that because we aren't meeting those arbitrary levels of quality, that our writing doesn't deserve to be read, even though those books that our favorite novels, have all been vetted and reviewed by teams of editors, publishers, and marketers. So I'm going to start this off with metaphors, as we've mentioned in the comments. And my regular running course is intentionally difficult. I start off with rolling hills and I circle around and end up on a very large hill. But as I start off on those small hills, the entire time I'm thinking, I can't do this. I'm too tired. I'm not a good runner. I'm going too slow. And there are two really big things with why I choose to still run on those rolling hills. First of all, I like the course. Second of all, well, I guess three things then. Sorry. So, first of all, I know that if I want to meet the pace going up those specific hills, that I need to run faster, which will tire me out more. So, by putting in more of myself at the beginning, I will be sacrificing my overall speed for the run, which means that to start off strong, it will burn me out faster. And the other thing is that I am terrible at determining my metrics for my speed because I judge my speed based on how I'm feeling, which is impacted by a lot of different things like soreness, exhaustion, etc. And those are terrible metrics for judging how fast you're going. I do run with a watch, but even so, the basis I use to judge how fast I'm going is those terrible metrics. Now, the same thing happens when I write, in that my first tip to help with imposter syndrome is to stop comparing ourselves or our work to anyone else, even if that other person is ourselves. So for the runs, I was comparing myself to speeds I think I should be going at or speeds I'd like to be hitting. But if I'm tired, if I'm sore, if I'm exhausted, I'm not going to make it. And doing so will only cause further harm. Now, in the time that's taken me to publish my first novel, I have been lapped multiple times by fantastic authors. That alone makes me feel like an imposter because I'm not keeping up with the tempo of my friends and fellow authors. And the last thing I should ever do is compare myself to what I perceive somebody else to be, because sure enough, I'm coming from an external point of view and I have no idea what struggles they're going through. I don't see them during the hours when they're sitting alone doubting themselves. All I see is what they'll send out in Discord or when they publish another book that is fantastic. Meanwhile, I'm sitting at a whopping zero, at least for the next few weeks. Well, I want nothing more than to have my friends succeed. Every time they publish another book, it is daunting and it does make me easily disheartened for my own accomplishments. So, comparing myself to someone who has published 4 great novels in the past year does make my imposter syndrome hit hard. Now, if any of you think that if any of you think that I know what I'm doing based on my Writing to Write YouTube channel, as was discussed last night in the happy hour, where you all think that I have this really clean and well polished series of videos, or that I never doubt myself or my skills or my writing, as the name of my talk implies, I don't have my shit together. I have been trying to get my novel published for easily over the past decade, and I finished that draft back in 2013. I wasn't happy with it, so I revised it and rewrote it and did it again and again and again until I got into a point where every 6 months I was completely tearing it down, starting over, and rewriting it. But a little over a year ago, I changed. I became a lot more active in YouTube, in AuthorTube, and I started publishing and putting out my own videos. that helped acclimate me, and feeling like I was part of a community helped get over my imposter syndrome. So, my next tip on defeating or subduing imposter syndrome is to find a network of trusted friends. Richard, that's great. More swearing, please. I try to keep it clean, but I do have more details about that later. Not in this video, but it's coming out some other time. Anyways, I want to pause right here and just say thank you all. I'm trying to go through my notes. I'm trying to give you as much information as I can, but I really am appreciative for all of you who woke up early and are joining me in this talk, or for those of you further out east where this is late and you're joining us in your afternoon, evening, whatever. Thank you for coming here and watching me give my talk. Anyways, based on building a network of trusted friends, I met plenty of brilliant indie authors through AuthorTube, and in my mind, we've held each other accountable. Without comparing myself to them, they pushed me along to write better and to actually get my novel published. Without comparing myself to them, we push each other along. And I don't want to see any of my friends struggling. However, I know that we all have those moments. So we need to work together to lift each other up. Like this past Mental Health Awareness Month, I was absolutely floored with the open and honest videos about the mental and physical struggles that we all deal with. Some of the videos that were shared on AuthorTube were absolutely heartbreaking for the daily struggles. And I think that the more we put that out there, or the more we show that life isn't easy, that writing isn't easy, then we can collectively raise each other up. As a community, we need to strive to be open and honest with what we're dealing with, because with social media and everything, we are putting out these pristine images of ourselves that don't really exist. And so that makes it much easier for people to get disheartened when they don't live up to whatever standards they have. And this openness that I've learned over the past year has made it a lot easier for me to ask for help. Now, a couple of you mentioned in the chat about work, and I, luckily or unluckily, on a biweekly basis, I suffer through extreme imposter syndrome whenever I get a new assessment that I need to perform, complete, whatever. Because for the first 5 minutes, I stare at it and I think, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. And imposter syndrome really, really hits hard. But then I fall back on my practices and procedures and move forward. Now, if I still feel like an imposter and if I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, then I'm lucky enough to have some fantastic bosses. For the most part, I've had some anchors, but I've also had some great bosses who have open door policies, and I'll just go in there and talk to them, or I'll ping them online and we'll talk through the issues. It might be that I have something going on in my life where I'm not able to focus on my work. And so every minute that I'm sitting there forcing myself to get my work done, it's actually detracting from what I'm capable of. And so a few times the issues were that I was doubting myself, or that I was focused elsewhere than where I should be. My attentions were focused elsewhere than where they should be. Thank you. Thank you. And that boss was there to simply listen. If it was something outside of work, they were just there to hear me vent about some frustrating thing that was going on in my life, or they were there to remove the relatively minor roadblocks to getting my work done. For writing, similarly, there are days when I just stare at a blank page, and I am a strong outliner. I have usually 40, 50 page outlines to go through, where I have specific dialogue, specific sayings, specific paragraphs that I can copy and paste from the outline into my story. And yet I still stare at a blank page. I get frozen with what to write because I'm worried that it's not good enough. And honestly, it's not. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's a first draft. That's a highly flawed set of loosely connected events. That's what it's supposed to be. It's not until we put the words down and refine it in the later drafts that it becomes something beautiful. So at that step of the first draft, I get over feeling like an imposter, because I know that in one sense, I am an imposter. Because I shouldn't be striving for perfection in that first draft. In fact, perfection is arbitrary anyways, and I shouldn't even be striving for it in the final draft. Because what I see as perfection in some of the books behind me, some of my favorites, it's an absolute travesty to someone else. It's a train wreck to them. So long as I can get the first draft down and keep refining it, I'll eventually get to a point where the story is good enough. So here's another slight tangent. Still comes back to the whole good enough thing. But earlier this summer, I was spending a week at my family's house, and my uncle was putting together a porch. So I went out there and I helped him. And he is a craftsman for decades by trade, whereas I am lacking in skills for home construction. Anyways, the entire time, to compensate for my lack of skills, I wanted all the pieces of wood that I was cutting and measuring to be perfect. I wanted them to be perpendicular. I wanted them to be level. I wanted them to look good. I wanted the holes we drilled in to not be visible from such and such side, whatever. And every time I kept saying, wait, let me measure this again. Let me make sure it's, lines up perfectly. Let me make sure that it's balanced, that it'll connect to the other piece of wood that's already there. That'll be flush against it. And every single time, my uncle waved me off and said, Ben, it's a porch. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be safe. It needs to hold up our weight. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but sure enough, he finished the porch. We did all the work together, and it held up after a party with plenty of people on it. So he wasn't concerned about it being perfect. He was concerned about being safe, which means that it was good enough. Can he fix it? Yeah, if the porch broke, he can fix it. But there were plenty of times where we cut something wrong and it didn't fit, so we threw the wood back into the scrap pile. Now, the best method I've used to defeat imposter syndrome is to recognize that perfection is impossible, so we only need to be good enough. Put more succinctly, Becca Syme, she's a wonderful author tuber. She gave a talk earlier on Friday night about making good choices. And in a previous video, she mentioned how imposters are the ones who don't get imposter syndrome. So the next time you start feeling those doubts, think about everything that you've accomplished. Think about the short story you've written, or think about the chapter or paragraph in your work in progress that hits you right in the gut, because you know that is fantastic writing, or it's just such an emotional point that you are glad it's written down. Or reach out to someone, and please don't go fishing for compliments because those feel fake, but tell someone what you're feeling or that you're doubting yourself. And my last tip is to focus more on the positive feedback and less on the negatives. I'm not saying to ignore all the bad reviews or anything like that, but if it's not actionable, then you should try and disregard it. There was a while where I found the wrong beta readers because they were the beta readers that I could simply get to look at my story rather than people who were really wanting to help me or really interested in reading it. And for each one of them that DNF'd my novels, I felt worse about my writing and about the manuscript itself. So eventually, I found better beta readers. I found people who gave me constructive feedback, like, Ben, this sentence doesn't make any sense. Ben, these character motivations don't align with what they should. Ben, this just feels wrong. And those are actionable items. So each time, even though I'm getting negative feedback, it still gives me places to work with. And that's helped me both as a writer and as somebody who wants to self-edit their novels. So by seeing what people were concerned with, I was able to look at my own work before I sent it out and try and find where those troublesome spots would be. So I'm trying to wrap this up as quickly as I can. Let's say that you've ignored everything up to this point and for some reason just started listening right now. What if we are an imposter? By that I mean, what if, compared to our favorite authors or these fantastic books behind me that I'm going to keep vaguely referencing, that, mind you, have been vetted by editors, marketers, and teams of people, some of whom specifically wrote those books to target audiences or to elicit certain emotions. Anyways, comparatively, we don't stand up to those. I mean, we don't measure up as I will never measure up to some of the works behind me, but I do need to keep writing. So the only real way to get better, the only way to not be an imposter, is to keep practicing or to read a book on technical skills, which will again tell you to keep practicing. So for every word you put on the page, that is a step further away from being an imposter. Now, if you are ever feeling down or if you're feeling like imposter syndrome is hitting hard, please feel free to reach out to me, writingtowrite@gmail.com, or DM me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm in no way certified to help, definitely not a professional in any way, but I can be there to be a sounding board, to listen, to hear about your struggles. And sure, I can offer advice, but I can also just sit there and listen. And honestly, that helps out a lot during a lot of these stressful moments for me, at least, because no one has their shit together. So we just need to be good enough. There we go. So those are my tips on imposter syndrome. And in case you're wondering, we got 2 other great talks coming up right after this. We have Richard Holliday's talk in Investing in Ourselves, which will be one of the tools the writers can use. And then we have D.L. Tillery's Structuring and Completing a Short Story. So I'm going to try and answer questions as quickly as I can. Oh, yes. Thank you, Richard. Please feel free to sign up for a newsletter. I'll be working to upgrade that very, very shortly. I sent out one newsletter already. I'm going to send out another one next month, this monthly thing. Let me see here. Questions. Do you feel with each draft or each book thing you finished, you feel more confident? Absolutely. Six Cats, thank you for addressing that. It's really funny. I've had a beta reader who read one version of my first manuscript, and then I sent him the second manuscript because while I was going through the editing and beta reading process, I had enough time to finish the second one. Anyways, he actually commented that the first chapter of my first book, or sorry, the first chapter of my second book was significantly better and noticeably better in terms of having a hook or just being better written. So not only did I feel more confident, but my beta readers recognized that my writing had improved from my second book over my first one. Yeah, let me see. Keep going up. Thank you, everyone, for all of the support. Let me try and find some questions. Let's see, Richard. I'm a morning runner. I hate the heat, so I try and get out as when it's as cold as possible, even during the winter time. Let me see. I think I saw Barrett Lori have a question that flashed by really quickly. So see if I can find that. Oops. Nope, not going to be able to do it. Let's see. If you have any questions, I can really quickly try and answer them in the next 2 minutes. But I'm very sorry I'm not able to. Oh, what's the best piece of advice you've received? Honestly, I would say just keep writing. So I know that it is difficult to do so. It's very easy to just stare at a blank page and not know what to write. But just put the words down and they become, once you start writing, they flow much easier. And even if you don't know where you're going, just like with this sentence, I didn't know where I was going to the start, but the words become much easier to say. And that's the best advice I can give. Just keep trying to write as best you can. And let's see. Oh, what advice do you have for people afraid to share their work due to imposter syndrome? Don't be. I know that is bad advice, but the worst somebody can say is, I don't want to read this anymore. And sure enough, the only way that you'll get better objectively is to hear what other people think of your writing. So sure, somebody might DNF your novel and that will absolutely hurt. But at the same time, you are limited in, or at least I was limited in how much I was able to self-edit my own work. And I wasn't able to see the issues within my own writing until I started sharing it out there. So the best advice I can give for that is to recognize that you are going to be hurt by sharing yourself out there, by sharing your work, but that it is an essential step to improvement. And I'm going to stop right here because we have to make room for the other talks. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm sorry I tried to do this as quick as possible, but I hope you learned something. And I hope you all, if not can outgrow imposter syndrome, then definitely subdue it. So take care. And I hope to see you in the chats.